Hey everybody, it's Felisa. Today is going to be an entry into murder, mystery, and mayhem. I'm not appearing on camera today because I look a hot mess, but I wanted to get this out for Vlogmas. And I want to say that I became aware of this case probably early this year or late last year. And since it's a Christmas time true crime story, I thought that it would be fitting to do this today. So this is the case of the Lawson family, and maybe it's not even really a case, it's more of a story because we know who done it and we know what happened. We just don't know why. So on Christmas Day in 1929, Charlie Lawson murdered his wife and six of his children before taking his own life. This happened in Germantown, North Carolina, and to this day, no one knows why he did it. There's a lot of speculation, but no one really actually has an understanding of what the motive may have been. So Charlie was married to Fanny. They were married about 18 years, and during that time, they had eight children, four sons, four daughters. They did lose a son, William, in 1920, but seven other children were still alive on Christmas morning when Charlie decided to commit this heinous act. By the end of the day, only one son, 16-year-old Arthur, was still alive. And, I still, after reading all of the reports and all of the studies, I still don't quite know what his motive was to that spared Arthur either. Anyway, so the Lawson family worked as sharecroppers, and after a period of time, they had finally saved enough to buy their own farm just 2 years before all of this happened. Not long before that morning, the whole family went into town to buy new clothes for a family portrait, and that served as the last official portrait of them all alive. At that time, new clothes and portraits were unusual luxuries for working class families, and many have seen this as proof of premeditation on Charlie's part, perhaps immortalizing his loved ones or, taking a final account of, who they are or who they were and what they look like before he slaughtered them all. The crime began on Christmas afternoon, and the daughters, Carrie and Maybelle, who were at the time 12 and 7, they were leaving to visit their aunt and uncle. Charlie waited for them near the barn, and when they got close enough to him, he shot them both with a shotgun. He then bludgeoned the bodies, and I guess that's just to ensure that they were dead. And afterwards, he hid their bodies in the tobacco barn. So, you like crouching down behind a barn, waiting for your two daughters, 12 and 7, who are just not even thinking about God, what their father is getting ready to do to them. It's Christmas. They're getting ready to visit their aunt and uncle, and boom, this happens. That just had to have been horrible. Hopefully, they never knew what had hit them. After that, Charlie walked back in the house. He shot his wife, who was on the porch, and then he tracked down his other four children and he killed them one by one. He shot his 17-year-old daughter, Marie, first, and then his two young sons, James and Raymond, who were 4 and 2, before beating to death 4-month-old baby Mary Lou. Like, seriously. The crazy thing about all of this is that before he went on this rampage, he sent his older son, Arthur, who was the one who escaped all of this, into town on an errand. And the motive for this was just not clear. And that's what I said before. Like, he sent him into town for this errand. And that just seemed to be mysterious because either he sent him into town to make sure that he wasn't around when all of this happened, and the plan was to kill him when he got back. Perhaps Arthur was bigger and stronger than all of the rest of the kids and may have been able to give Charles a run for his money and, been able to maybe defend himself against any attack. That is, if he saw it coming, or be able to defend his siblings or his mother against this rampage that was going on. But, the odd thing is that Charlie was armed with a weapon. So, clearly he was shooting and killing. But the tiniest baby, he decided to beat her to death. And that takes a lot of fortitude. Like, I don't want to make it, play it up and make it seem like, oh, he had this great resolve. But that's just insanity to me, to beat a baby to death. Like, who does that? That was just, like monster on a different level. Anyway, once the family was all dead, Charlie positioned their bodies, arms crossed with rocks under their heads like pillows. Then he went off into the woods where he stayed for several hours before shooting himself in the head. By the time Charlie died or committed suicide, the bodies of his family had already been found, and several of the neighbors who had gathered on his property heard the gunshot that ended his life. So I'm not quite sure what tipped the family off, honestly. Or not the family, who tipped the neighbors off. I can't, there's some stories that show that Arthur came home and, discovered his family dead and sounded the alarm. And then there were other published reports that said that the neighbors actually came to check on them because they were expected to do something and they hadn't arrived, and that's how the bodies were discovered. Either way, I can't imagine walking into that scene and seeing all those people deceased and arranged so weirdly, just laying down with rocks under their heads and arms crossed and as if they were sleeping, and he had literally decimated his family. Anyway, the neighbors set off into the woods to figure out, what the gunshot was and to see what they could see. And lo and behold, Charlie's body was found by a tree encircled with footprints. He had been carrying letters to his parents, and he appeared to have spent some time pacing around the tree before finally deciding to end his life as well. At that time, no one seemed to know why he would suddenly kill his family and then himself. And, some people believe that a head injury that he had months prior was the cause, although the autopsy did not reveal any evidence of brain damage. Then there were rumors that Charlie hadn't committed the murders at all and that he was a witness to some unscrupulous dealings by organized crime, and they were victims of these gangsters to keep them quiet. There was a publication of a book in 1990 called White Christmas, Bloody Christmas, and there was a new theory that was behind the Charlie Lawson killing spree. And according to an anonymous source, as well as relatives and friends of the family, Charles was suspected of having an incestuous relationship with his older daughter, Marie, who you recall was the first one that he killed, or the first child that he killed after he killed his wife. And the speculation was that she may have been pregnant with his child. In 2006, a book called The Meaning of Our Tears, that author provided more support for that theory, including a conversation with one of Marie's oldest friends and closest friends, who claimed that Marie had told her that Charles had gotten her pregnant. There, of course, is no official report that would support this supposed pregnancy. And when I read that, I thought that it was, odd and also tragic that there was no autopsy that was carried out on any of the family, it would seem. Perhaps the coroner at that time, I mean, this was, a different time in life. And 1929 was not exactly a banner year for all things scientific, I don't think. And so maybe it was just not routine that autopsies were carried out on victims where the perpetrator was known or, very heavily suspected. So, it was probably very clear how they died, whether it was by blunt force trauma or gunshot or whatever he did to them. If it was obvious to the coroner or to a pathologist, perhaps spending resources and time doing an autopsy to come to a foregone conclusion was maybe not the best use of the resources that they had at that time. And who knows, maybe they didn't even have access to pathology and autopsies and things like that in Germantown. I don't know. It could be a situation where bodies would have had to have been transported to another larger town to be carried out, and perhaps money was a factor. I have no idea. I'm just speculating, but it sounds plausible. Anyway, Arthur, who was the only surviving member of the family, grew up and he did get married and he had four children. But he was sadly killed in a car accident in 1945 when he was 32. And I really wanted to find if he had done any interviews or, like if he had told his side of the story such that it is, or had any insight into his father's demeanor or behavior that particular day when he sent them into the town to the store. If he had any sense that something wasn't right with dad, and just blew it off or whatever, and maybe in hindsight he thought back to that day and thought, dad was acting strangely, or maybe he was acting perfectly normal. But I couldn't find anything where he'd actually talked about it, and maybe he didn't want to talk about it. I don't know that I would be, like really excited about having that conversation. That's extremely painful. You come back from the store and your whole entire family, like everybody, is dead, and your father is the one that did it. That's amazing and crazy, and just I can't even think of the words. It's probably on purpose. Anyway, there is a small museum that's dedicated to the Lawson family, and there's a dry goods store in Madison, North Carolina, and they have erected kind of a homage to this family, and it's on the original site of the funeral home where the 8 members of the Lawson family that died, the funeral home that did the embalming. And so, to this day, tourists and, people who live local to the store go over there to view newspaper clippings and old photographs of the family. And one of the storekeepers said that after all these years, people are still fascinated with that terrible tragedy, as is typical. Most people get fascinated by true crime, hence the reason why I'm doing this whole story. But I think that part of the allure for this is trying to wrap your head around a motive of why this would actually happen. And, I think that the whole speculation about Marie being pregnant is a good one. In 1929, in 2020, that would have been scandalous. But in 1929, that would have just been like beyond. And I don't know what the penalty would have been for that, except, I know that the shame and the stigmatism and things like that would have just been horrific. But to slaughter your entire family, that feels like a snapped moment to me, especially when you think about, he was in the woods for several hours. I don't know how several was defined, but he was out there for several hours and, pacing round and round trees. And, they found these letters that he had written to his parents, which, I couldn't find any articles about what was contained in those letters. But I'm assuming that, he maybe explained himself or said goodbye or something along those lines. But at any rate, the fact that he did all of this and then contemplated his own death for several hours is just, yeah, it just kind of gives me the thought that he was just definitely not in his right mind. And, you have kind of like this outlier of Arthur, who I'm very glad survived, but why was he saved? Why was he spared? Was that on purpose? And if so, why? And if it wasn't on purpose, it was poorly thought out. And, Arthur apparently did not get back in time to meet his own demise, which, again, we can be grateful for. Anyway, that's the story of the Lawson family murder that occurred in North Carolina, Germantown, North Carolina in 1929. You can look up some of the information for this event. I don't know. I didn't know what to call it. But you can look up some of the information for this event. It's a lot of information out there, and it was very difficult to kind of piece together a cohesive story. So I hope that it was not too confusing, but you'll find that there are a lot of groups that are devoted to this particular case, and they really go down a deep, deep rabbit hole of speculation and China. Let me know what your thoughts are below, and I will talk to y'all later. Bye.